I'll start with a couple notes for people. Some of you may know me, some of you may not. I'm Rachel Schmidt, and I'm the Marketing and Development Coordinator for the League of Women Voters of Connecticut. So I'm over here in Hamden, where our office moved in July, and we're excited to have more people in the office coming after vaccination. But we are going to send out a follow-up email after this event with a recording and also some of the resources that are going to be covered. And I'd like to have everybody, as the presentation advances, just put your questions in the chat box, and we're going to go through those after the presentation. If there's any questions that we don't get to, we'll get to those in a follow-up. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Patricia Rossi. She's a member of the League of Women Voters of New Haven, and she also serves on the state board. Since 2019, she's been the People-Powered Fair Maps champion for the state of Connecticut, and she has done a lot of work through the census and into 2021. So thanks, Patricia. Take it away.
Sure. Thank you, Rachel. I want to share my screen now? Hello, everyone. I just want to thank you so much for your willingness to spend an hour this afternoon talking about redistricting. As Rachel said, I've spent some time on redistricting for the past year or two, and so it's obviously really important to me, and I hope I can make it important to you. So the League of Women Voters of US started a People-Powered Fair Maps campaign 2 years ago, and because redistricting is done differently in every state in the union and one day in the District of Columbia, the campaign is customized to whatever is going on in the state. And in Connecticut, that means a focus on the legislature.
Tisha, I wondered if you hit from the beginning over on the side there.
Oh, I was wondering why I wasn't advancing. Thank you.
Then you should get just the slide, I think, if you hit the little arrow.
Okay. Yay, thank you. Thank you.
There you go.
That's much better. Okay. So before we talk about the redistricting, the remapping of what's interior to Connecticut, we should probably acknowledge that before there was this rectangle that's Connecticut, the land was here and there were people here who considered it their own, and it was the home to 20 indigenous nations before it was Connecticut. The reason why redistricting is important is because if redistricting results in gerrymandering, which is what we call unfair districts, not fair districts, then people feel that the consequences of their vote are already foregone. It's clear who's going to win. It's clear what's going to happen. What's the point of voting? And that's something, of course, as people who defend democracy and want to expand the access to the vote is not something that we want. So I think we were going to have a poll here. Rachel?
There we go. Can everyone see it?
Yeah. So as I started out with, I'm hoping that I can make redistricting an important priority to you, but that's not fair of me to assume. We'd like to know what do you see as your real goals for how you can spend your time in 2021?
We'll just leave this open for a few more moments while everybody gets a chance to answer. Okay. I know a few people are driving or on the road and listening. All right, shall we reveal the results?
Sure. So it looks like a lot of us are very interested in, I think only appropriately, in making sure that early voting and no excuse absentee voting remain available to us in Connecticut. But, you know, we can do more than one thing at once. We're interested in other things as well, including redistricting and open and transparent government, which fits into redistricting and other really important things. So this is great. One reason why the League of Women Voters US made the People Power Fair Maps a priority this year, and it is one of their 4 voting priorities this year, along with ending voter suppression, expanding the vote, and revealing money in politics. The reason why they made it a high priority is because we can't expect any relief at the federal level. With some decisions that the Supreme Court made in June of 2019, they made it clear that they are not going to interfere at the state level for however the states do their redistricting, unless there are truly egregious racial gerrymanders. So if we want to have fair districts, we have to police it at the state level. Why are we doing it now? We're doing it now because this is the year. The US Constitution calls for the counting of all of the population in every year that ends with a 0, and it's been done every 10 years since 17.
Oh. I'm sorry, Tisha, you are muted. I accidentally muted you when I was trying to admit someone.
Oh, okay.
Thanks.
I didn't swear or anything. I wondered what I'd done. And so in the years that end in a 1, the ones that follow the census are the years that we must redistrict. And it happens every 10 years. And one of the reasons we want to focus attention on it is because it does happen every 10 years and only every 10 years, which means that if we don't like the way the districts are drawn in 2021, we have to wait another 10 years to do anything about it. Another portion of this is the US congressional districts have to be reapportioned, which is to say, because of population shifts from 2010 until 2020, the 5 US congressional districts in Connecticut may not be equal in population. And one of the only strictures on drawing districts is that they must be roughly equal in population, or else they are not in accord with the 1 person, 1 vote rule. So the League of Women Voters has designated what fair redistricting, what criteria will produce fair districts. Because I actually had friends say this to me, with computers now and all sorts of sophisticated software, why can't we just have computers draw equal and fair districts? And we can't, because the computer has to be told what are the goals of these districts, what are the criteria we're using. And if your criteria is to make sure that your party always wins, you're going to draw different districts than if your criteria is that you want to make sure that districts are promote partisan fairness. So the League of Women Voters of US has identified these as important criteria that will produce fair maps. The districts must be substantially equal in population. That's required by the federal government and Connecticut's constitution. They must be geographically contiguous, which means you can't have random chunks all over the place. They have to respect town boundaries and try very much to keep towns in 1 district. And that is in the Connecticut Constitution. They should promote partisan fairness, and they should preserve and protect communities of interest. And I'll talk about how we define a community of interest in a second. But to the point I was trying to make about how you have to define what your criteria are, and that will define what kind of districts you get, if these 5 other things have been considered, then compactness and competitiveness may also be considered, just as long as you've started out with the first 5, which the league considers more important to create a fair district. So what is a community of interest? A community of interest is a group of people who live in a geographic area who have some common political, social, or economic interest. And it is not sufficient for that group to be a racially identified group. It can't just be African Americans. There has to be another element that makes them a cohesive group. And it could be something like being in the same school district and interested in pursuing a particular educational goal. It could be people who live in a transportation network. It could be people who work all in the same industry. In Pennsylvania, one community of interest is the coal, people who work in the coal industry. In Connecticut, it might be people who work in truck farms or in the nursery agriculture. And it might be people who are interested in preserving green space or expanding green space in their neighborhood or in their town. What are not good criteria for drawing maps are anything that any rules or data that one uses to protect incumbents or to make it much easier for one party or another or one group to control the outcome of what happens at a district. Those are clearly undemocratic criteria. So an unfair map is a gerrymandered map. And the word gerrymander comes from the governor of Massachusetts in 1812 was a man named Gary. And he had a map like this drawn that people felt looked like a salamander. And so somehow it got called gerrymandered, and the term has endured. Here are 2 very clear and egregious examples of gerrymandering in North Carolina, showing how people have been packed into funny shapes to reduce their voting power. And then closer to home here in Connecticut, this is what our 5 US congressional districts look like. And I'm relatively new to Connecticut, and when I look at this, I need an explanation for why districts 1 and 5 look the way they do. And the explanation appears to be that in 2000, Connecticut lost a congressional district. We went from 6 to 5. And so that required a pretty substantial remapping of Connecticut to create 5. And there was a compromise made by the Democrats and the Republicans on the bipartisan redistricting committee to create this map you see in the middle in 2000. And it gets recreated pretty much. It didn't change too much when it was redrawn in 2010. The idea was that these 5 districts would give each party a decent chance at winning. You'll notice that I said it was a bipartisan committee, and it was, and it will be, which means that half of the members are Democrats, half of the members are Republicans. They are appointed by the heads of their political parties. And that is intended to make it a fair process. But the league feels that a bipartisan committee isn't anywhere near as likely to draw maps that will take the citizens, people's needs into consideration as a nonpartisan commission. Bipartisan commission is members just by their nature are going to consider the needs of themselves, their friends, their colleagues. But we can't change this because the bipartisan reapportionment committee and commission, they are part of our state constitution. And we all know how hard it is to change anything that's in the Connecticut Constitution. So rather than focus our attentions in 2021 on changing from a bipartisan to a nonpartisan committee, we are going to work with what we have, which is we are going to try and make sure the people of Connecticut know that this process is going on in 2021 and encourage them to let the committee, their elected officials, the media, everyone know what their goals are in new districts. These are the critical dates we need to keep in mind. This is also enshrined in the Constitution. The committee has to be appointed by February 15th, and it was. Representatives Candeloro, Perillo, Exum, and Haddad, and Senators Formica, Abrams, McCrory, and Kelly have been appointed to the committee. Representative Candeloro is the only person who has been on the committee before. The rest of them are new to it. It was expected that the census information would come to the states by April 1st, but there's been a very bad delay, and the information will not come to Connecticut until very late September, in fact, the last day of September. This may serve to compress the process, and one might think, oh, it's March, we probably don't need to do anything if the process is going to be so late, but that is certainly what I initially thought. But that isn't true, because the committee will still be the staffers that support the committee. They will start working on draft maps. They will start planning what their process will be. And if it gets to be June or July, which is when they will meet during special session and when they start having public hearings, it is a reasonable supposition that a lot of decisions will already be made. And it's important that people know that we're aware of this process before they are too deep into it to make a change. So there will be, the committee will meet in June, July, August. They have to present their maps to the General Assembly, and this Assembly has to accept them by September 15th. If they don't, then that committee is disbanded, and a new commission is appointed by the same people who appointed the committee. And then those 8 people choose the 9th. That commission has to come to agreement by November 30th on a set of maps. And if they do not, then the process goes into the Connecticut court system. And that has been what's happened in the last 2 cycles. Neither the committee nor the commission were able to get a set of maps accepted. The courts insist that that a decision be made that acceptable maps be submitted by February 15th, because there will be elections later in 2022, and people have to know what districts they could run in, and people have to arrange for administering elections. So if you look at the districts as drawn in Connecticut right now, these are the 2010, the maps drawn in 2011 that we're currently using. You can see that there aren't, that they do seem to respect town lines. You have the Senate districts on the left and the 151 House districts on the right. These maps show the outlines of the towns in green superimposed on top of the district lines. And I'd encourage you to look at the part of the state that you know well and see if that mapping perhaps looks right to you. Maybe it does, maybe it's great the way it is, or if there's something you think could be improved upon there. The cracking and packing are 2 strategies used to gerrymander. And cracking means that you take a community of interest and you disperse the members of that community into many districts so that their voting power is diluted. And opposite. Packing is taking all of the people or in a community of interest and smushing them into one or two districts so that all of their influence is restricted to just that area. If you do that, and if a bipartisan committee does that, they are able to ensure that the people in power remain in power. Here is a map of the state of Connecticut that shows where communities of color are concentrated. The yellow portions are where communities of color live. And it could suggest that communities of color have been packed into districts, but it could be a reflection of the segregated housing pattern in Connecticut. And, this represents a problem. How are communities of color to be adequately represented when they are segregated by where they live? At a micro level, here is the city of New Haven showing communities of color. And then the blue lines are the House district lines and the red lines show neighborhoods. And what strikes me in this map is that Newhallville at the top of the map here seems to be cut in two. And that might be great. That might mean that Newhallville has more, plenty of representation. It might not be. We want to hear from the people who live in Newhallville and and if they don't like it that way, have a voice in the process as it unfolds in 2021. But my point is, is that we have to encourage people to be aware of this, to look at what's going on and to make sure that it reflects their desires. And one way of seeing if your district reflects your desires is to play around with maps. And there are in 2020 some wonderful free software apps that will allow you to play around with your district, your US congressional district, any level of districting that you'd be interested in. What's wonderful about this is that it's easy to use and it is loaded with a tremendous amount of demographic data, and it also maps down to the ward level. So this is the US congressional districts in Connecticut. And then this shows, having played with Dave's redistricting app, if you change what you prioritize, you change the shape of the map. So if your priority is to make sure that minorities are strength is well represented within the districting, you might create a set of maps that look like this. If you want to prioritize partisan chances that in each and every district, Republicans and Democrats have a very good shot at winning, then you might create maps that look like this. But just sort of commonsensically, it's hard to see how these would be workable. And then just a third example is if you just wanted them to be nice and neat, but you have to maintain equal populations, roughly equal populations, you might get districts that look like this. This just all of that shows is that you need, that the criteria you choose will define what your maps look like. And I think our point is that we don't want the bipartisan redistricting committee to decide what those criteria are alone. We want them to have input from other stakeholders in the state. Because if they don't have input from other stakeholders in the state, then their legislators will choose their voters rather than voters choosing their legislators. There's one very specific kind of gerrymandering that unfortunately we have excellent examples of in the state of Connecticut, and that is incarceration gerrymandering. And incarceration or prison gerrymandering is the practice of counting incarcerated people in the district where the prison was built rather than at their last home address. And what this does, it increases the voting power of the typically rural and white districts where prisons are built, and it reduces the voting power of typically urban districts of color where the people come from. And here are some maps to show you what it looks like, what the situation looks like in Connecticut. This map shows where incarcerated people lived before they were incarcerated. And this map shows where they are counted, because that's where the prisons are. And this shows, you can see in the previous map, oh, sorry. No, last viewed, here we go. You can see here that with the districts up in the north central part of the state, that's where there are a lot of prisons. Those orange districts and the others as well, the 9 that are highlighted here, if they did not count their incarcerated populations in those districts would not make the population cutoff to be a district. So that does not seem to be fair. The ACLU, Common Cause, the NAACP have chosen to focus on legislation as a way to remedy this problem. And Senator Winfield introduced Committee Bill 753, which would remedy this problem by counting people in their home, their last home address, rather than in the district that the prison is in. A joint favorable report is due out on this on April 6th, and we encourage you to let your representatives know that you would like them to vote in favor of Committee Bill 753. How can you get involved? I think you can get involved the way the League often gets involved, through education, organization, and advocacy. We want to educate people that this process is going on. We want them to know that it's going on now, that it will probably move very quickly in the summer and fall. And so if we are going to educate people and organize people to get their voices heard, we need to start now. And the way to do that would be, I hope, to present educational slide decks, to get people together, talk to them about it, to ask people to play around with Dave's redistricting app. We have a demo that we can share, a 5-minute demo to show how easy it is to use. We can get people to, we can share meeting dates and hearing dates with people, and we can get speakers to speak to this issue to communities across the state. There are lots of redistricting apps available, and we're promoting Dave's redistricting app just because it's really easy and it has a lot of information in it, but there are others available. And in addition to education, I think demanding transparency is very, very important. And this is an area in which Connecticut is pretty far behind other states. There isn't even a website up for redistricting in Connecticut yet. Many other states, including Oklahoma, have a very robust sites that have a tremendous amount of information and ways for people to participate in the redistricting process are already up. We don't have that yet. Last time around, the data on which the districts were based was not made public. That should probably happen. We need to make sure there are plenty of open meetings of the redistricting committee. Now that we have teleconferencing, that should be relatively easy, but there should be also in-person in-person meetings around the state. These things can help the committee use the criteria that the people of Connecticut want used. So we'd like you to notify your communities of interest in your area that this is going on. encourage map usage, and encourage and please encourage your legislators to end prison gerrymandering by voting for Committee Bill 753. So that's the end of my presentation, and I hope people have questions.
We do have questions, just a few of them. And after we get through the ones that were submitted through the chat box, if people want to unmute and ask any further questions, if we'll have a little bit of time. So the first one was just a comment from Elsa about the importance of state and Senate districts and city town council districts. I think you made that point. James Simon had a question. In any redistricting at any level, is any consideration given to moving as few people as possible? People like stability in voting districts.
There is a standard that the core of a district be maintained, because for that reason, yes, there is a standard. Now, but the funny thing about Connecticut is there are three things that are required, and they are that the districts be substantially equal in population, that they respect town borders, and they are contiguous. Those are the only things that are required by law to be considered.
Thank you. And from Jennifer Foreman, she has two questions. First, are you saying that the commission will do most of its redistricting before it receives 2020 census data?
It is possible in that really these are refinements of maps that are already in place, right? I mean, we don't expect, the lines don't have to change that much unless there have been tremendous population shifts. I picked that piece of information up from experts in other states who have been through this many, many times, that the legislators have a general idea of how it's going to look. It just has to be refined when the data comes in. I mean, in their defense, if they wait until September 30th for the data, and they're supposed to have submitted maps by September 15th, they're going to have to start work earlier if they're going to come anywhere near that deadline.
And then the second question from Jennifer, are we sure that Connecticut is keeping our 5 congressional districts?
We're pretty certain. Some data just came out in the past couple of days. Connecticut's not going to gain or lose. Some of our neighbors will. I think New York is going to lose. Maybe Vermont. I have that information. I just saw it somewhere this morning. I can share that.
Cool. And there's another question from James. Why can't inmates declare their hometown as their bona fide residence and vote via absentee ballot?
I'm gonna defer. Jean Rabineau seems to know the answer, and I bet you Judy Lehman does too. Somebody, yeah. Jean, do you wanna?
There are two parts to that. First of all, most of the inmates, even though they're counted, and the voting districts are done by population, not by voting population, most of the people in the prison system, not all, cannot vote at all. Remember, felons cannot vote. All right, so they're counted and they weight the populations towards those rural towns, but as voters, no. In terms of can they count by their home districts, if the bill that's up, 752?
53.
Passes, the corrections department does keep a list of inmates by home addresses. And once they've finished their felony sentences to the point where they can vote again, the towns are notified to put them back on the rolls.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
As a registrar in Trumbull, I get that at least once a month. All right. So if the bill goes through, then yes, they will they will almost automatically be allowed to declare their residence before incarceration as their voting address. Okay, right
The
now,
thing that, the reason why people are upset about this is that these legislative districts only have 23,000 people in them. So if you're counting another 1,000 inmates, that's a significant chunk of making yourself a district. That's what sort of seems to make it pretty unfair.
the trouble with prison gerrymandering, as I understand it, is that it gives the voters in the districts that contain prisons as much as a 6% advantage over communities that are less packed.
That's exactly right. And so one of the statistics the ACLU has is that in some parts of a New Haven vote counts for 85% of an Enfield vote.
Yeah. But as far as the actual count goes, people do have to remember that the census must count people where they are resident, not where they consider themselves home-based.
Right.
Which is why college students are counted as resident in their colleges, even if they can vote in their parents' home communities and so on. So the count will be the count. The question is, will the state pass a law that enables us to allow the voting districts to count people as of their last place before incarceration?
I was hoping that people would think about their own districts and their own areas and think about, I know what I thought about when I learned about this is that I live near the Mill River and it's pretty dirty and people are concerned about cleaning it up. And I think I'd like to know, I would like to talk about whether my ward in my district shouldn't somehow have a relationship with the other wards and districts that are around the Mill River. You know, so it isn't, we tend to think of this, I think, about racial gerrymandering, which of course is terrible and to be avoided, but there are other sorts of gerrymanders that disenfranchise groups whose voices should be heard. And I know, for instance, some people have told me that in Trumbull, because the town boards use the redistricted information to design polling places and how many there will be, there have been, they changed from 7 to 4, and it really suppressed the vote because it made it harder for people to get to the polling places. That's just sort of a side effect of this, because of course the town board can change whatever they want to do whenever they want to do it. But I think in Ridgefield, is it that the top of the town is in one district and the rest of the town's in another? You know, people need to talk about that if it's a concern to them.
This isn't a question, but it is tied into what you're talking about, this town level. Aaron Good said many towns and cities have much worse procedures for redistricting than the state procedures.
That well may be true. I don't know anything about that, I'm afraid. I've really focused my attention on this bipartisan committee in Hartford. And I've spoken to a couple of the staffers, and they seem to think that it will move forward without a hitch, and I don't seem to be very concerned about public input, and don't seem to be very concerned about, hearing from the people. And I think that what struck me in my conversations with these people were that it was going to be, the bad part of being the land of steady habits. It's going to be very steady, and but will it reflect what people want? Most of what the legislators want.
And Virginia Gunther asked, So is there a schedule or time for voters to give their voice on redistricting?
There has been no schedule posted by the committee as to when they're going to, have public hearings, when they're going to have their first meeting. It hasn't been scheduled. I just checked this morning because I didn't want to not say the wrong thing, and there is nothing up about the 2021 redistricting committee. Somebody's asking, can we get a link to Dave's redistricting app? Absolutely.
I can add that right here, but we'll also send out all of the resources we mentioned here in a follow-up email to everybody today. Well, not today, but who registered today.
I can see Aaron asked, will the state redistricting committee hire a GIS mapping consultant to assist them? They may, I don't know. That's not something, I don't know that they've made that decision yet. How they're going to do it. I guess I'm trying to think of communities of interest that I should talk to in the greater New Haven area, or like, for instance, conservation voters. Like, do they have an issue they want to talk about? In New Haven, a huge issue is safe streets for bicyclists. It's just enormous issue that gets a lot of attention at the city level. Do those people want to have some, visibility at the redistricting level? I feel like it would be a good thing for us to sort of get out the word that this is happening and let people decide, whether they want to do something about it.
So I just was going to interject, Tisha, that maybe this would be a fun time to put in our one poll question about what people in the room with us today think about what they would consider, what should be considered for redistricting. If you want to go with that.
Well, that'd be great.
Yeah.
I'll leave it open for a few more minutes.
I feel, if I ruled the world, they would have a website up that had their timeline on it, that had their process on it, that had draft maps on it, things like that. But there isn't anything like that available yet.
Patricia, can I interject something here?
Sure.
One of the problems that we ran into in Trumbull, because we just redistricted back from 4 districts to 7, is that of course, we had to use the old census count because the new one wasn't out yet. When the new count comes out, it's going to be effectively March of 2020, right? Or 2021. The big population shift in Litchfield County and Lower Fairfield County, with people moving out of New York and into our part of the state, is going to happen. It has happened, just too late to be counted.
Yeah.
So the districts are going to be out of kilter from before they're drawn.
Yeah.
That's one problem that we're facing in Trumbull. We've got some high-rise communities going up in town, and they're counted as 0 population because they were on farmland on the day. And the other thing I wanted to bring up, and I don't know if this is a factor, when you're talking to your community, some of the members of my league who live in Stratford were up in arms when the town of Stratford broke up the senior housing complex in Roanoke Village between 2 different districts because that complex had elected a third-party candidate.
See, that's a perfect example of gerrymandering.
And they were furious, and we were going to go all out, except that 2 years after the district was split between Stratford 8 and Stratford 9, they discovered that they were still the biggest voting bloc in 2 districts instead of in 1. So they're now not so sure they want to go back to being a unified bloc. So you really do have to talk to your people.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm seeing a bunch of stuff in the chat about transparency, and I think that's super important. And I'm just wondering, you know, as local leagues and as a state league, what we can do to demand some more transparency. You know, when we hear that Oklahoma has a really great website already up, and it's not like their redistricting has to be done any sooner than ours. Everybody's has got to get done, you know, by the end of this year. It feels like Connecticut should be able to have a website up that had information on it so that if people were interested.
So it looks like people want mainly respecting town borders
Yeah,
and then preserving communities of interest,
yeah.
which makes sense, I guess.
And
My
we have,
understanding is they've done a pretty good job with respecting town borders with some, you know, with some exceptions, but you know, those concerns need to be elevated.
we have a question from James Simon about any towns in Connecticut that are known for being more fair about redistricting and a good model to look at that we might
Oh.
contact.
That's a great question. I don't know if someone knows. I don't know.
There's another question from Christine Goldhawk. Redistricting is going to be of interest in Stamford as we have had major population growth in downtown and Harbor Point. Who do we contact if we want speakers?
Well, contact me and I'll see, and I'll figure it out. I spoke to some people in Bridgeport who were telling me that it was very, that there did seem to be packing going on in Bridgeport, where the percentage of Bridgeport's population that are Black and brown people are, I may get the percentages wrong, but let's say it's 75%, but they only have representation that would suggest that they're more than like 35%. And that's because those communities are packed in particular districts. So, you know, we do have, I'm sure we have packing and cracking in Connecticut. It's a question of whether it rises to the, you know, to bother people.
And that's all that's in the chat box for questions.
I do want to mention that we're co-sponsoring with a Connecticut Mirror in a month, a panel and discussion on redistricting, and we're having an expert, Michael Lee from the Brennan Center is going to be one of the panelists, and the experts at CT Mirror think that there should just be 3 people on a panel is the perfect number. So we were thinking a community activist of some kind, and then maybe, you know, a member of the committee, a member of the redistricting committee, probably ideally someone who will defend the way it is done right now, because I'm going to just guess that Michael Lee is going to suggest that a bipartisan committee is not the ideal way of doing it. I don't know that, but I'm just going to guess. So if anybody has any ideas, love to hear them. And if anybody has, you know, wants to take this presentation and use it with their local league or whatever, I think that would be a great idea.
Can Gail ask a question?
Yes.
All right, I put them, it was in the chat box over and over again. I have no sense of who our participants are. Are there some districts that have not one person on this group in their, you know, their congressional district? You know, we're talking about as if we're representing the entire state, but I'd have no feeling. Somebody mentioned there might be 60 people participating, but what if all 60 of us are from Bridgeport, Hartford, and New Haven?
Well, I can look and I can look because I know a lot of the people and where they're from, and we've got a pretty good coverage of many of the, if you're talking about congressional districts, most of the, I think we've pretty much covered most of the congressional districts. So, you know, I can't go any deeper into the state Senate seats or whatever, but just with a quick glance, I can see people from Southeastern Connecticut, from Southwestern, from Northern. So I think we have a pretty good spread, Gail.
Thank you.
Well, Patricia, there's one more question from Tony about how are we tracking the committee's schedule for meetings or hearings?
I email the staffers for the committee members and I ask them, that's how retrograde and ridiculous to my way of thinking this is right now. I don't quite know what to do about it other than to try and, you know, ring a bell and say this is silly and how backward are we? Part of the problem for, I think, for the league right now is we're just we have so much to do with, you know, with the early voting and no excuse absentee voting and protecting voting rights in Connecticut right now in the legislature that it's hard, you know, I don't know when it is to start yelling. I mean, if anybody has a good idea where to yell, and I'd be very interested in hearing about that. I do think that if we, you know, we funneled things up through our representatives saying, hey, what's going on? Is this committee open? You know, have they had their first meeting? What are they doing? That would be helpful. And if, you know, if your representative is one of those 8, if any, you know, if they don't happen to be mine, but if they happen to be somebody else's, that would be really great that we could, you know, we could reach up that way.
Do we know that there's somebody from each of the 5 districts on the committee?
I don't know if they do it that way. We know that there are 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans.
Right. I don't know the names of any of them. They didn't sound familiar to me.
Well, Vincent Candeloro represents a district just north of me, and Mr. Perillo's name is unfortunately in the news recently for some campaign finance problems, and Senator Formica is South
New London, yeah, Southeast, New
Yeah.
London area.
So some of these names are familiar to us. They just don't happen to be, I don't know whose districts they're in.
McCrory is Hartford. Abrams is Meriden.
Dear
Kelly
God.
is Stratford and Monroe.
Seems like the urban districts are very well represented.
And we're about 3 minutes away from 5:30. If we have any other questions or comments from anybody who didn't get a chance.
I
And
think that we can say that Patricia would be willing to come speak to anyone's league if it all worked out. And we also have the State League Zoom account. So if you wanted to partner with the State League, we could provide for that on Zoom for your league if you're interested.
And we partnered with Data Haven to create the maps, some of the maps that were part of this presentation. And the young man who worked on them with me is eager to show people how to use Dave's redistricting app. And he would love to show you how to use it. So Nathan would be happy to, you know, to do a demo of it. He's not only really good at the maps, he's actually somebody who is deeply committed to social justice and you know, knows a lot about government. He's I think a senior at Yale.
And we're going to send out all the resources that Patricia went over and the slides and more information about the upcoming April event, different ways you can get involved. So you'll look out for that email in the next day or two.
Or should we say thank you to Patricia?
Oh, thank you, Gail.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for doing this, that, you know, spending an hour talking about redistricting. It sounds dry, but it's really, really important, and it only happens every 10 years.
10 years, that's right.
Thank God.